If you sell on Etsy long enough, you'll eventually experience this. A listing that used to get views slowly stops performing. You didn't break any rules, you didn't change anything drastic, and you're not doing something obviously stupid, but the listing fades anyway. Views drop, favorites slow down, and sales become inconsistent. And because Etsy doesn't tell you what happened, you're left guessing. Most sellers immediately assume it's an SEO problem. Keywords, tags, titles, something technical. And that's understandable, because that's what the internet trains you to think. But in a lot of cases, chasing keyword fixes is what makes the situation worse, because you start changing things that didn't need changing, and the listing gets even more unstable. What's happening here isn't obvious, and that's exactly why it keeps happening to smart, hardworking sellers. The issue usually isn't one missing fix. It's a pattern that builds over time. And once you see that pattern, you stop blaming yourself for not knowing SEO, and you start focusing on what actually causes listings to fade. Let's be honest, most Etsy sellers who are struggling aren't lazy. They're doing work. They research keywords, tweak titles, rewrite descriptions, adjust tags, update images, watch videos, buy tools, and try to keep up. From the outside, it looks like optimization, and from the inside, it feels like constant effort. But the results don't match the effort, and that's where frustration really kicks in. Etsy doesn't say, "Here's what broke." It doesn't say, "Your listing structure is unstable," or "You've changed too much too often." You just see the metrics drifting downward, and the normal human reaction is to do more. More edits, more tweaks, more changes. But the thing that feels like progress can quietly become the thing that causes decay. People expect failure to look dramatic, like a sudden drop to zero. But Etsy listings usually decay instead. They lose momentum quietly, and because it's slow, you keep touching it. You keep fixing it. You don't stop to ask whether the fixing itself is part of the problem. That's why sellers can spend months doing constant improvements, while the listing slowly gets weaker. Here's the hard truth. Etsy doesn't reward intensity. It rewards stability. Changing your title 5 times in a month doesn't look like effort to an algorithm. It looks like uncertainty. And uncertainty is exactly what makes performance unpredictable. A stable listing gives Etsy something consistent to observe. A constantly changing listing forces Etsy to keep reevaluating what it even is. Every time you change a listing, Etsy has to reprocess it in some way. It's not just reading your text. It's tracking signals over time. When you make repeated changes, signals don't stack. They reset. And this is where sellers accidentally hurt their own listings, because the changes are usually made out of anxiety, not out of a controlled plan. So the listing never settles long enough to build trust. Most Etsy advice is built around tactics. Change this, add that, rewrite this, do those tags, try that structure. But it rarely talks about timing. It rarely talks about protecting stable listings. And it rarely says, "Stop touching this now, let it sit." So sellers end up learning and executing at the same time. They watch something new, then immediately apply it to live listings, then watch something else and undo it. And the listing turns into an experiment instead of an asset. Learning is fine. Testing is fine. But testing on your live listings nonstop is where things go sideways. The listing becomes a moving target. You never get a clear baseline. You never know what actually worked because you changed 3 things at once over 2 weeks. And when the numbers don't improve, you assume the solution is more changes, when the real solution might be fewer changes and better structure. This is also how burnout really starts. Not because Etsy is impossible, but because nothing ever feels done. Every listing is almost right. Every week brings another fix, another adjustment, another tweak. And when you live in that loop long enough, you stop trusting your own decisions. You start feeling like results are random, like you're unlucky, like Etsy is broken. But in many cases, the problem is simply instability created by constant intervention. When you look at shops that last for years, they're boring behind the scenes. Their structure is consistent. Their listings don't change constantly. Their workflow is repeatable. They're not reinventing their shop every month. And that boredom is a sign of stability. Stability doesn't look exciting. It looks consistent. And consistency is what creates predictable outcomes. Now here's where it gets even more important. When sellers try to scale, the same instability problem multiplies. More listings means more decisions, more chances to second guess, more opportunities to apply advice inconsistently. And without structure, small mistakes repeat across dozens of listings. That's why some shops plateau around 20 or 30 listings. It's not always demand. It's often operational complexity and the mental load of managing everything manually. This is why structure matters, not as a fancy concept, but as a practical guardrail. Structure reduces decision fatigue. It reduces inconsistency. It stops you from making emotional edits when you're stressed. It protects listings that are working from constant interference. And once structure is in place, then yes, it saves time. But the first benefit is that it reduces chaos and prevents you from accidentally breaking your own momentum. This is also where AI gets misunderstood. AI isn't valuable because it can write faster. It's valuable because it can help you stay consistent when humans get tired. Used properly, AI can reduce randomness. It can help you keep a stable structure across titles, descriptions, tags, and product setup. And that matters because on Etsy, stability compounds. Randomness resets. The goal isn't to outsmart Etsy. The goal is to stop fighting it. Stable inputs produce stable outcomes. Chaotic inputs create unpredictable results. Most sellers don't need another tactic. They need fewer changes and clearer rules for when changes are allowed. They need a system that says, this part stays stable, and this part is where we test, instead of testing everything all the time. If you want a practical way to apply this without spiraling into more tweaking, here's a simple approach. Stop editing your best performing listings just because you feel nervous. Only change one variable at a time when you do change something. Give changes time to settle. Separate learning from execution, meaning write ideas down, but don't immediately apply them to live listings. And most importantly, build a repeatable structure you can follow, so your shop doesn't become a collection of one-off decisions. That's really the point of this whole video. Most Etsy listings don't fail because sellers are lazy or clueless. They fail because the workflow is unstable, and instability is easy to create when you're constantly reacting. The sellers who scale aren't necessarily smarter. They're calmer. They reduce randomness, protect what works, and let stability compound over time. And that's really it. There isn't a trick here, and there isn't a shortcut. It's about giving your listings room to work, protecting them from constant interference, and building a system that doesn't depend on reacting every time numbers move. If this way of thinking was useful, you'll find more explanations like this here. Take your time, apply it slowly, and let stability do its job.